that mathematics isn't just something we impose upon the world, but it's actually describing the fundamental structure of the world. It makes predictions that we then go out and confirm.
What you're telling me and telling our audience is, look, this isn't something we're just making up. We're seeing math in the very fabric of the universe. So does that mean math is the language of God?
Atheism says everything came from randomness with no design and no purpose. But what mathematician Dr. Anthony Bosman points out first is something most people have never noticed. The same mathematical pattern shows up in seashells, flowers, pine cones, hurricanes, and even entire galaxies. That shouldn't happen in a random universe, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. As you watch, I'll show you why this order in nature points clearly to a creator you can trust.
Let's talk about math now. Why do math patterns show up in nature?
Well, first let me give you an example of it. You have that pineapple over there, right? Mm-hmm. So if you grab that pineapple, and in this pineapple, if you hand it to me really fast, you can see you have two different kinds of spirals. You have spirals going this way, and spirals going this way. So if we count the spirals going this direction, we're going to lock it in with my thumb. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then back to my thumb. So 8 spirals going that direction.
All right.
Now we're going to count the spirals going the other direction.
So
I'm going to lock it in with my thumb. 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and back where I started.
All right.
So 8 one direction, 13 the other. Incredible.
Right.
So why is that incredible?
Yes, I'm still waiting for the answer.
So 8 and 13 are special numbers in mathematics. They show up in something called the Fibonacci sequence. You heard of that before?
Yes.
So Fibonacci is where you began with 1 and 1, and then each next number is the sum of the previous 2. So 1 and 1 gives you 2, 1 and 2 gives you 3, 2 and 3 gives you 5, 3 and 5 gives you 8, and 5 and 8 gives you 13. The Fibonacci numbers show up in the pineapple. And it doesn't just show up in the pineapple. Grab that sunflower. If you look at the spirals of the inside of a sunflower and count them, you get Fibonacci numbers. You get 34 going one direction and 55 going the other direction, which are the next 2 numbers in the Fibonacci sequence. And it's not just pineapples and sunflowers. You can look at pine cones. They show up there. You can look at galaxies. You can look at seashells. The Fibonacci numbers show up across the universe.
So you're seeing math patterns, and especially as a math professor, I'm good you're able to see this. You're seeing math patterns throughout our world, throughout the universe. What is that telling you?
Right. So when mathematicians talk about this, and physicists, for example, Eugene Wigner was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and he wrote a paper called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics. And throughout this paper, when he looks at the fact that mathematics shows up throughout the world, he calls it miraculous. 12 times in this paper, he used the word miraculous to describe it. And so here's a scientist wrestling with the fact that somehow mathematics describes the universe. He throws out all the scientific vocabulary and uses the theological word miraculous to describe it. So for me, when I listen to mathematicians and physicists wrestle with this, it's such a clear signpost to the fact that there is a creator.
When Dr. Anthony Bosman explains the Fibonacci pattern, here's where it gets interesting. As the numbers grow, they move towards something called the golden ratio, a proportion that creates striking harmony. This shows up in the smallest living things like plants, helping leaves get the most sunlight, and it even shows up in the largest things we can see like spiral galaxies. Beauty, harmony, and math keep appearing together in places that have nothing to do with each other. That doesn't look random. Atheism asks us to believe this happened by chance, but that's like dumping 1,000,000 pieces of Lego on the floor and claiming they built themselves into a vast city. Pieces don't arrange into design, purpose, and order without a builder. For Christians, this points to the mind of a wise creator who made the world with intention. Then Dr. Anthony Bosman shares something even more striking. Math isn't invented, it's discovered. What he shares next, including a story about Galileo, shows how mathematics pointed to something in the universe long before anyone could see it.
Now, some people might say, wait a minute, you're saying math is discovered, but I think math is created or invented. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a bit of both, right? When Isaac Newton looked at the data for how the planets orbit and came up with his universal law of gravitation, right? He used notation that he had invented to describe the orbit of the planets. He comes up with his law of gravitation. But he's not imposing something onto the world. He's actually discovering something about the world. And the way we know this is he discovers this in the 1600s. In the 1700s, we find a new planet, Uranus. And when Uranus was discovered, it didn't quite fit the equation of Isaac Newton. His equation seemed to be wrong. But then people realized, well, it could fit the equation if there was something else pulling on Uranus, pulling it a little bit further so it's just not quite exactly what the equation said from this one perspective, but if you include this extra planet, it would fit the equation. So people hypothesized there must be an extra planet beyond Uranus. Now, we had no evidence of this yet. The telescope wasn't strong enough to perceive it. But 100 years later, we discovered the planet that the equation predicted, which was Neptune. And so what you see going on here is the mathematics isn't just something we impose upon the world, but it's actually describing the fundamental structure of the world. It makes predictions that we then go out and confirm.
What you're telling me and telling our audience is, look, this isn't something we're just making up. We're seeing math in the very fabric of the universe. So does that mean math is the language of God?
Yeah. So that's what Galileo said. When God created, he used the language of mathematics, right? And people have wrestled with, why is the universe so mathematical? And some have tried to resist concluding God. There's a professor at MIT. He concludes the reason that the universe is mathematical is because the universe is just a mathematical object. You and I are mathematics that are somehow self-conscious and alive. And it's kind of an absurd, ridiculous theory, but it's showing the lengths to which people are wrestling with the fact that there's this deep structure to the world. When I talk to my physicist friends about this, I have one friend who's a physicist, comes from a secular background, doesn't have any Christian commitments, but he told me that this is what keeps him up at night. Why is there this mathematical structure? This keeps me up at night. And then he says, I know how you as a Christian make sense of it. So he as a secular physicist can look at me and say, I know how you as a Christian, he sees how it points to God, right? And so it's not just something that you read into it, but it's actually the structure of the world is strong evidence that there is a creator.
That's really incredible. This is the first time I'm getting excited about math right now.
When Dr. Anthony Bosman says math discovered rather than invented, it goes deeper than nature. It means the universe is built on a mathematical structure that existed long before humans were here to think about it. Isaac Newton didn't invent gravity, he discovered what was already true. Here's where things get really interesting. Think about the expansion of the universe. If it were even slightly faster, galaxies would never form. Slightly slower, everything collapses back on itself. It's like a dial with trillions of tiny markers where life's only possible if it's set on one exact point. If it moves even a hair's breadth, nothing as we know it could exist. That kind of precision doesn't look accidental. It looks like careful design woven into reality. For Christians, this shows that reality itself is ordered by a greater mind and not formed by chaos. And just when you think this was already compelling enough, Dr. Anthony Bosman goes one step further. He turns to the Big Bang, and what he shows here is hard to ignore.
You know, when you think about the theories behind how this universe came about, the majority of scientists say, well, there was this Big Bang. Before that, there was this, essentially the laws of physics were broken down, the singularity, and then some quantum fluctuation, and boom, the universe began. Stephen Hawking said, no, we don't need any kind of creation or origin. The laws of gravity have always been there. Yeah. And then you got the multiverse theory out there that especially superhero movies are really interested in, right? And then there's theism. Based upon your study of mathematics, let's lay aside the church, let's lay aside the Bible. Which of those makes much more sense and is inconsistent with the data of mathematics?
Yeah. So from much of human history, we just assumed the universe always existed, right? The ancient Greeks, they thought it was always here. And that's why is the universe here? It's always been here, right? But the discovery of cosmology is the universe had a beginning. And so now how do we make sense of the fact the universe had a beginning? The Big Bang Theory is just the recognition that there was an initial point of time. Now, one way to try to explain how the universe had a beginning is to try to appeal somehow the laws of physics did. This is what Stephen Hawking claims. He says, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. But when I think about what the law of gravity is, it's just a mathematical description of the world, right? Do you have a wallet on you?
I don't. I wish I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about pull out your wallet, you can use mathematics to describe how much money you have. You know, maybe it's like a 20 and a 5, 25, mathematics describes it. But you can't scribble down plus 100 and have $100 pop into existence, right? I mean, that'd be great if you could, but mathematics doesn't have creative power. It only has descriptive power. So when people think that the laws of physics can somehow create the world, it's a confusion. The laws of physics are just describing how the world works. It can't describe what actually created the universe. And so I think the fact the universe had a beginning coheres so well with the biblical story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? For thousands of years, the biblical text said it, and now science is catching up and we can see indeed there was a beginning to the universe.
Well, let me push back a little bit here. Here you are, you're saying, wait a minute, I think theism is the best answer. God created this universe, right? But how do we know which God? I mean, for the Hindus, they got Brahma, right?
Yeah.
You got, for the Muslims, they got Allah. You know, you can go to the Norse gods, you can go to Greek, get into the Titans and Zeus or whoever, right? But why do you think the Christian God seems to be the most reasonable source behind this universe?
Yeah. So one of the unique things about the biblical text is that it doesn't give a story of where God came from. If you compare the account of Genesis with that of the Babylonians or the Greeks or the Egyptians, they all have theogonies, which are stories of where the gods came from. That originally there was chaos or there was water or there was darkness or whatever the original material was. And then from that, the gods emerge. And so the gods themselves have origin stories.
Nature creates God.
That's right. But what you see in Genesis is the opposite. In the beginning, God. It's just God. And then God creates everything, the heavens and the earth. And what we now see is indeed nature has a beginning, right? So if nature has a beginning, then you can't have God coming out of nature. And so I see what's going on in the biblical text has been confirmed now with the fact that there's a beginning to the universe.
Dr. Anthony Bosman then presses on the real tension in the atheistic view. It asks us to believe that nothing produced everything, that order came from disorder, that motion came from non-motion, and that purpose somehow emerged from a universe with no purpose at all. The deeper we look into structure, precision, and consistency woven into reality, the more that explanation starts to unravel. Laws of nature, mathematical order, and the fine-tuning of the universe don't look like chaos-producing design. They look like intention from the very beginning. For Christians, this doesn't point to an abstract force, but a personal creator. An ordered world makes far more sense if it came from a rational, intentional being who was already there in the beginning. This is why God is the best possible explanation for the universe and its design. And just when you think the argument is complete, Dr. Anthony Bosman turns to the question atheists often raise, who created God? What he says next shifts the whole conversation and opens up a perspective on eternity that may change how you see life today.
Dr. Bosman, let me come at another and go, but how do you know God doesn't have a beginning? If we're going to apply the idea of something with the cause and beginning, why don't we apply that to God? Why is God immune from this beginning? Aren't we going into this problem of infinite regress?
Yeah. So the question is, if God created the universe, then who created God? Some
Right.
people ask this, right? The reason we want to explain what created the universe is because the universe had a beginning, right? The fact we can look at the cosmological evidence and see the universe is expanding. You play that story in reverse. If it's expanding, you go back to those initial point. But it's only because the universe had a beginning that you ask what created the universe. The belief in the Christian God isn't a belief of a God that had a beginning. Psalm 90 verse 2 says God is from everlasting to everlasting, right? God is without beginning. God is necessary. There's nothing else that explains the existence of God. So believing in a God that had as a beginning is not the Christian God. We call that an idol. That's a false God, right?
Now, since we're talking about God and eternity, let's talk about eternity, right?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why we have this bag of sugar, but I'm sure you have an explanation behind why we have this bag of sugar.
Yeah. So when we talk about big numbers, a million, a billion, a trillion, a lot of times they just all sound the same to us, right? What is a million? What is a billion? You know, some of us maybe have $1 million, but most of us, they're just big numbers. So I wanted to visualize what some of these big numbers are. So if you open that bag of sugar, I did the calculation this morning. in a bag of sugar, I'm not going to ask you to count them, it'll take too long, but there's about 1 million grains of sugar in there.
Okay.
So if you pour it out in here, we can see what a million looks like. Now, as you're pouring it out, how long would it take you, you think, to actually count those one by one by one?
Oh, several lifetimes.
Yeah, well, it's not too long. If you take 1 per second to count up to 1 million, it would take about 11 and a half days. So just shy of 2 weeks.
Okay.
So if you have 2 weeks that you're free, you can just count through those grains of sugar and you can get up to 1 million.
By the way, this is only something mathematicians think about.
Right, that's right. Now, if instead of counting to 1 million, you want to get up to 1 billion, it's going to be a lot more than this. It's going to be 1,000 of those, right? If you get up to 1 billion, how long do you think it would take you to count to 1 billion?
I can't even compute that.
So if you're doing 1 number per second, it would be about 32 years.
Okay.
I just celebrated my 1000th birthday a couple of years ago. So 32 years is 1 billion seconds. Now, these are big numbers, right? But compared to eternity, right? If you think of each of these, instead of being a second, a year, this is your life. That's 80 little years, right? And that's compared to 1 million.
Right.
But compared to eternity, this is nothing. So the mathematician Blaise Pascal, he was a mathematician, a theologian, he reflected on eternity and he said, you know, so often we think about the present and we magnify the present as if it's everything. We're thinking about what I'm going to do tonight, what I'm going to do this weekend, everything about the present. But at the same time, we never think about eternity. We never think about the whole. He says, by doing so, we magnify the present to make it everything, and we diminish eternity to make it nothing. Mm-hmm. And so what mathematics teaches me is it reminds me that, okay, let's keep things in perspective, right? Let's keep just the moment of our life in perspective of the rest of eternity. Mm.
When Dr. Anthony Bosman addresses the question, who created God, he shows that the question assumes the wrong kind of God. Christians don't believe in a being inside time, space, and matter who needed a cause. We believe in the one who brought time, space, and matter into existence. God isn't part of the universe. He's the reason it exists at all. He's self-sustaining, eternal, and without beginning. And when you begin to see God this way, it changes how you see your own life. This world isn't all there is. Our days here pass in the blink of an eye, and the pleasures we chase never fully satisfy because we weren't created for this world. As Christian philosopher C.S. Lewis once said, all that is not eternal is eternally out of date. We were made for something greater. We were made to know God, to love Him, and to enjoy Him forever. Which leads to a powerful question. What was God doing before He created anything? And why does that matter for you and me today?
That's really incredible, and I appreciate you helping us to zoom out and see the bigger picture. You know, speaking of eternity, and we think about God, I mean, eternity is one of those things, it's like you keep going back before the creation of this world, you go back before the creation of this, you know, the angels, and you keep going back in your mind before God had created anything, before there was anything that was a creature or anything that was part of created order. And we get back to when it was just God.
Right.
What was God doing from eternity past?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to wrestle with because whenever you think of God, you might think of like God in heaven. But as you said, even the angels had a beginning, right? Even God's throne, it's just God. What is that ultimate reality? As I've grappled with this, there's a line of Jesus that's helped me. Jesus prays in John 17. So towards the end of his life, coming to the cross, Jesus prays to the Father, and he says, Father, you loved me from before the foundation of the world. And so the picture there is, there's just God, but the Christian conception of God is rich. God exists as three persons, as Father, Son, and Spirit. And so from eternity past, God existed in love relationship, the Father loving the Son. When Jesus thinks back to eternity past, he said, you loved me. And so the thing that fills eternity in the Christian view is God's love. And that's what filled eternity past, and then that's what fills eternity future, right? Sometimes I think about, what am I going to do forever, right? If I take seriously the claim that Christ gives us eternal life, like there's some cool math that we can do, right? But only for so long. What is going to fill that eternity? And for the Christian, it's that we get caught up in the love of God. The same thing that filled eternity past, God's love, fills eternity future.
And what you're telling us is, look, it may be difficult to comprehend, but God was in relationship.
But I think it's good for us to think about this because so often we get caught up thinking this is what it is, reality, right? Like this material stuff is reality. And therefore my life should be about accumulating nice material things
Right.
or whatever it might be. But it's like actually like all of material reality is just a blimp compared to the eternity that preceded it. And so when you zoom out even further now, right? You zoom out like all of this that's material, that is just such a small moment compared to the greater fundamental reality of God's love. And so that means the things I should be about in this world are relationships. It's about the love of God, showing that to people, right? Things that endure, things that will last forever.
Dr. Anthony Bosman then brings everything together. Before creation, God already existed in perfect love as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He didn't create us because he was lonely or lacking something. He created us to bring us into that love. This is where everything you've seen in this video finds its meaning. The order in nature, the precision of math, and the design of the universe all point to this God. But our sins separated us from him. That's why Jesus Christ came. He obeyed God in every thought, word, and action where we failed, and that obedience is given to us as righteousness. He died in our place, took the judgment we deserved, and rose again to reconcile us to God. Through the gospel, we're invited back into that eternal love. By trusting in Christ, we receive real hope, lasting satisfaction, and the promise that death itself isn't the final call. Because he rose, we too will rise. This is the hope behind the design, the intelligence, and the purpose woven into creation.